Good afternoon to all of our Sacred Heart parishioners in the greater Medford area, at Jacksonville Mission, and now at Shady Cove as well as we expand our operations. I'm coming to you today to give you a reflection that I'm entitling Trust and Commitment. And it has to do with the call of the apostles. If you are blessed enough to be able to attend daily Mass, you will note that this week it seemed like the theme, mostly coming from Matthew's Gospel, was the call of the apostles. So I guess I find that that's still my frame of mind as we come into these Sunday readings. If you read some of the Gospel accounts, you might get the impression that Jesus just sat under a tree one night and pulled an all-nighter in prayer and woke up the next morning with the team roster and announced the names of all the 12 apostles. But I think for this reason, I like Matthew's Gospel the best. It gives, I think, a more realistic sense of probably how the selection of the apostles unfolded. For instance, in chapter 4, he is choosing Peter, Andrew, James, and John, two sets of brothers who are fishermen in the fishing village of Capernaum. But he doesn't call Matthew until chapter 9. And you get the impression that all the way along, he's selecting people. And this is one of the areas, too, of his ministry that we are reminded, probably more than ever, that God's ways are very different from our ways. The way he goes about choosing the future leaders of the church is not probably how most people would have done it. For instance, he didn't select any rabbis. He didn't go to Jerusalem to a rabbinic school to seek out scholars of the Torah. If it were to happen today, we would say he didn't go to Mount Angel Seminary and ask for seminarians. He didn't turn to the Vatican. He didn't ask for bishops. For the most part, his team are made up of blue-collar folks. None of them have any formal theological training. So I think that's an indication that what he's calling them to do has a whole lot less to do with head knowledge, or little to do with head knowledge, and more to do with heart knowledge. And by the way, it should be noted that long before the second person of the Trinity became the Word incarnate, it's shown in earlier times this was God's way as well, because our first reading highlights Amos, one of the minor prophets of the Old Testament. And what does Amos note today? He said, I didn't receive any special formal training either. I'm not a trained prophet. I'm not part of a prophet's guild. I don't have any special job titles or college degrees. He says that he was a tender of sycamore trees. I don't know what that would look like exactly. A lumberjack, a landscaper, a forester, and he was a herdsman. So he was a rancher and a landscaper, say. But he said, nevertheless, God has called me to be a prophet. The call is authentic, and Amos responded with a yes, but he didn't bring with him a lot of worldly qualifications. He brought a willing heart. That's one unique aspect, but I bring that up because oftentimes, I know I've been guilty of this, maybe you have a time or two as well. You read the Gospels and sometimes we forget we have the benefit of 2,000 years of hindsight. We know how the story ends in the Gospels. The apostles don't have that advantage. They're trying to discern who this Jesus is all along, and they're wrestling with things he's teaching them that are quite different from their Jewish upbringing. It's a departure from some of the traditions that they had probably strongly embraced and were holding on to. At times, Jesus reinforces these practices, but other times he lets them know they need to leave those things behind. And we read some of that and we say, why are they so slow to understand? Why are they such slow learners? I think what I've observed is it's far less common for people to read those accounts and see what is so extraordinarily awe-inspiring, jaw-dropping really, those areas where they are light years ahead of most of the rest of us. I think today is an example of one of those areas where the apostles completely excel compared to most people of faith today. It is this passage that comes from Mark's Gospel from chapter 6. You know it well. It's where Jesus says, bring only a walking staff, don't bring a second set of clothes, don't bring any money, don't bring any material possessions, just go where I send you and proclaim the gospel. If people accept it, stay there a while and teach them. If they don't accept it, shake the dust from your feet, etc., etc. You know that story, I'm sure. But do we ever maybe press pause and try to put it in modern terms or apply it to our own heart to see whether that's a thing that we would have readily agreed to do? As I explained it to the folks at Mass this morning, I said, imagine all of us in a church were being sent out. This group over here, I'm sending you to Bend, Oregon. This group, I'm going to send to Eugene. You all are going to go to Portland. This group over here is going to go south to Weed and Crescent City, California, and Sacramento. And this group's going to go up to Vancouver, Washington, and Olympia and Seattle to proclaim the gospel. And oh, by the way, I don't want you to take your car. And I'm not giving you a Greyhound bus ticket. I want you to walk. And don't bring your cell phone with you. You don't get to phone a friend. You don't get to cheat and look up answers. You won't have the comfort of the internet. Don't take with you your wallet. Don't take any spare money. Don't try to hide a debit card in your sock. Don't bring any luggage. And don't bring a can of mace. Don't bring a gun or anything like that for protection, even though at times I'm telling you now you're going to have to flee for your lives. That not everyone will accept what you have to share. Would you say yes to that? We understand what Jesus is doing. He's giving them training wheels while he's with them, hopefully that they can gain confidence by their small successes, and where they trip and fall, he's still with them as a coach. He can correct them. He can coach them up. He can teach them. But think of that consideration, that command, really. I don't know that I could say yes to that. You know, as a diocesan priest, I have a bank account. I have a car. Priests, when they receive new assignments, though they may not have a say in where they go, we bring a U-Haul truck. We come with possessions. Even as a religious, though, when I could fit all my worldly possessions in a duffel bag, there are still aspects of that offering that are fairly intimidating. It's a rare, rare soul, I think, that could accept them. And I tried to imagine, you know, by tradition, we think James and John were young. Perhaps they were teenagers, perhaps they were in their early 20s, but likely still living under their parents' roof. Can you imagine them going home and sharing with their parents, hey, this Jesus guy, he's really amazing, and we're very impressed with what he's teaching us, and this is now what he's asking us to do? If you were a loving parent, or even an average parent, or quite honestly, I think even a below average parent, I think you would stop those young men at a point and say, how much do you really know this Jesus? I don't know that this is the best plan. This doesn't seem very prudent. Or we think the majority of the apostles were also married. Imagine them coming home and trying to explain to their spouse, you know, this Jesus that I've been spending a lot of time with, he tells me I need to hit the road and I'm not going to see you for 2 or 3 months and I have no plan. We're just going to trust and see how it goes. I think that would be a hard conversation. Here's where they're so far ahead of us, in my opinion, where the apostles are giants. And the more I thought about it this week, the more I think this is the reason why Jesus chose them. They had that kind of heart to say, I'm all in. I'm pushing all the poker chips to the center of the table. I'm a risk taker. And I just believe in this so much. I have so much conviction that I'm going to commit. Commitment. It's a powerful, powerful thing. And there's an unspoken second half to this, I think. I just got back from the amazing parish conference in Kansas. One of the things they gave us to read It was a book by Pat Lencioni called "The Five Dysfunctions of a Team." The very first one is absence of trust, and the other skill sets that, if they're absent, cause great problems are based first on that foundation stone of trust. You can't advance to the other things. You can't have healthy conflict. You can't debate. You can't even wholly commit to a thing unless you start with trust. Scripture doesn't really explain any of that stuff, but I imagine it had to happen in the sharing of meals, in conversations after hours, when they were done for the day doing ministry. This is the time when I think Jesus was at his best as a rabbi and a master. He was teaching these apostles. They are falling in love with him, and they are willing and ready to trust their lives to him. I've been speaking the last month or so about the concept that you can't serve someone that you don't first love, and you can't love someone you don't first know. So although Scripture is pretty silent about that process of building a relationship, that's the thing that must have been happening very early in this process. Matthew's gospel lets us know that it's very early in the 3.5 years of Jesus' public ministry. There's a mention of a few miracles that were performed. The principal thing that is mentioned is the Sermon on the Mount, a long teaching, which means he had some kind of celebrity status by then. He was known enough to draw large crowds. But it's, as I say, it's early. These teachings about radically following him and preparing them to be arrested, to be brought before kings and not worry about what they would say, the idea that they would flee from town to town, that their message would divide families, 1 against 2 and 2 against 1 and all the rest. This is a major shift in tone from that more compassionate and merciful message of the Sermon on the Mount. But they're ready. They commit and they have trust. When you have those things, job titles and formal education and training are a whole lot less important. When you have a heart set on fire, that's what Amos has. Amos, the landscaper, Amos, the rancher, he had commitment as well. And he had trust in the Lord to go and be a prophet, whether convenient or inconvenient, regardless of the cost. He said he was ready, and he went. Now here's the takeaway for you today. And normally I say you and I, but today I say you. As I read Scripture, Amos is not me. I have a decade of theological training. I have 25 years of ministry experience. Amos is not me. But Amos is you, the layperson. Those who don't perhaps have theological training, or maybe just a minimal amount of Bible study experience, just some basic catechesis. But nevertheless, God is calling you to be a prophet. I know this with a certainty because we say in baptism, we're baptized into Christ, prophet, priest, and king. To be a prophet, it's not optional. God doesn't ask if you feel like it. Tough noogies. You have to go. And when you take up that challenge, it's a hard thing. I'll end with this image because I think it reinforces the risk that they're taking, just how much this commitment and trust is needed. It has to do with that common image of the shaking the dust off of the feet. For years I read that passage and I just concluded it was a kind of a metaphor, an action equivalent to us saying shake it off. You know, if you were a customer service employee and you just dealt with a very difficult customer who treated you harshly, to shake it off would mean I need to clear my head, I need to clear my heart so that I don't bring my anger to the next customer I have to face. Or maybe if I fall on my face and I failed in some task, I need to take a pause and a few deep breaths to reset my determination so that the next thing I try to do, I'm giving my full and my best effort. That's a kind of a healthy, natural reset. And that's what I always read that passage as, that if someone rejects your message, they reject your effort to share this compassionate and loving invitation of God, just shake it off and go to the next town, give it another try. But I learned something this week that really blew my mind. I learned that this expression is describing a literal action from the ancient world. Israel was divided, generally speaking, into thirds. The northern third was occupied by the Jews. That's around Galilee, where Jesus started his public ministry. The southern section also is a Jewish occupied territory in Jerusalem, the city of God. But in between the two, as a kind of a sandwich, is the Samaritan territory. The Samaritans were greatly hated by the Jews. They were viewed as enemies of the Jews historically and also as heretics. They also viewed the Gentiles in general in this way. But I learned that, as pilgrims, if you were in the north, you would have to pass through the Samaritan territory, no getting around it, going south, going north. Or if you were a trader, if you were a soldier and you had to go outside Palestine and travel into pagan lands, they had this custom where at customs posts, when you reached the border and were preparing once again to re-enter the Jewish territory, you would shake the dust off your feet. It was as common as a Catholic dipping their hand in holy water coming into a church to make the sign of the cross, or maybe more appropriate as a comparison, I shared, it's like the airport experience now in security, where you have to take off your shoes and your belt before you can get cleared to enter your gate. The idea behind that gesture for a Jew, I guess if I tried to put the most positive spin on it would be this. Lord, don't let me take the false teachings and the immorality of these people home with me. I don't want to bring that contamination with me. And so I don't even want to take the dirt from this land into my homeland. A healthy equivalent for us today would be to look at our troubled culture, see all the immorality and the problems, and to recognize that God has called us to be in the world, but not of the world, that sometimes our work of necessity, it puts us in some scandalous settings or some ungodly settings, dealing with people who are irreligious or immoral. And a good aspiration would be, my work is done, my day is done. I'm going to take a pause and a deep breath before I enter my house, because I don't want to bring all that to my spouse and my children. I want my home to be preserved from that immorality. I don't want the poison of our culture to be a part of my family. That would be a good spin. However, I have to say, if you were a Samaritan, if you were a Gentile and you saw it, you would be greatly offended. You would probably call it racist. Here's the important takeaway, though. In both Matthew and in Mark, when Jesus sends the apostles out with no backup plan and no extra supports and all of that, it says beforehand that in fulfillment of the gospel, in these early stages of training, when they're getting their training wheels, they are only to go to Jewish towns, not to Samaritan territories, not to Gentile places, to the Jews, because prophecy had it that the chosen people of God would be the first to hear the good news. And he says, if they don't accept you, shake the dust from your feet. Think about that implication. Because the north part of Israel and the south part of Israel, to borrow a modern phrase, would have been a safe space for devout Jews. Jesus is saying, this mission that I'm giving you, this gospel, it's going to, the effect is going to be that you have no safe space left. I'm your safe space to lean on the strength of Christ and to realize our home is nowhere in this world. Our home is heaven. And that some of the people that they formerly looked to for strength, for support, were now going to be their enemies. Were going to even seek their lives. They were going to have to flee for self-preservation. That's part of the high cost of being a prophet, that no place on earth could be called home any longer. No safe space, no backup plan. Carrying this message, but they say, I'm all in. I commit. I don't know how this is going to work, But I trust you, Lord, because I believe in you. That's got to be us. You're Amos. You don't have formal training, maybe. You don't have a title, maybe. But if you have a heart for him and you give it to him and you trust, he can do powerful things through you. That is what's needed. That's why the apostles were chosen. God bless you. Try to make a commitment to Christ at this time in your life. Work on trusting him more deeply. It's a gradual process for most of us. We might not get there overnight. We might not get there this calendar year. But my hope and my prayer for myself is that I get there before I die. And the only way we can do that is practice, practice, practice. Surrender to him. Have a blessed week, and tune in next week for another spiritual meal. God bless.